Hello and welcome, friends. In the earlier sessions that we have had in Unit 2, we started with a discussion on marketing communication process, and we moved over to the various elements in the various attributes which make which make a communication message, communication campaign effective. We also talked about the various communication platforms or the various elements in the promotion mix available to you. We talked about the process of developing an effective communication, and we talked about these various steps involved in this process. Then we took up the first two in detail, wherein we talked about how to identify the target audience and then how to determine the communication objective. And therein we also discussed the response hierarchy models, right? So response hierarchy models, these four models we had discussed there. These were discussed because they have a wide acceptance as far as the marketing world is concerned. Now please understand one thing. One situation where these models actually apply are basically high involvement situations, high involvement purchases, and not low involvement purchases. Now what do we mean by high involvement purchases? High involvement purchases are those which entail a lot of monetary risk or a lot of status risk. For example, I'll give you example of monetary risk. For example, you are buying a car. So if you make a wrong decision and buy the car which is not suitable for you, in essence you would basically be spending 5 to 6 lakhs and they would all go waste. So this is a lot of monetary risk involved here. Again, status risk. For example, if you buy a wrong brand of perfume, if you buy a brand of perfume which probably does not smell good, don't you think though it does not involve a lot of monetary risk, for example, it would only cost you 200 rupees or 250 rupees, but then it would involve a lot of status risk, because you would always be wary of what people would think when you are wearing that particular perfume, right? So a lot of status risk is involved. So such purchase situations are called high involvement purchase situations. Why? Because since a lot of risk is involved, you are very much involved in the purchase process, which means that you will first collect the information, and then you will try and collect the information from as many sources as possible. Then you will weigh the different brands on the various pieces of information available, and then you, after doing a lot of number churning and after giving it a lot of thought, you decide which particular brand to buy and which particular mode to buy in. So there's a lot of involvement from the customer end, from the buyer end. So they are called high involvement purchases. On the other hand, there are low involvement purchases. For example, a toffee. In case of a low involvement purchase, do you think you would do this kind of thinking before buying a toffee? You would never do that. In fact, you would not even go to a shop to just buy a toffee. You would be going probably to buy some grocery items, and at the spur of the moment you decide to buy a toffee, because therein you don't give it a big thought before buying the toffee. The reason is that it does not involve a lot of risk. It hardly involves 50 paisa. Even if the toffee brand doesn't turn out to be a very good one, it does not involve any status risk for you. So they are low involvement purchases. And let me repeat that these response hierarchy models, where we have the cognitive component, then we have the affective component, and then the effective component being succeeded by the behavioral component, these models apply only and only to high involvement purchases like a car or maybe a bike, or maybe when you decide which particular MBA program from which particular institute to join. This is fine. Or maybe again when you decide whom to marry, because these are all high risk situations. They involve a lot of monetary risk, status risk, psychological risk, and that is why you are very much involved in the purchasing process, and that is why they are called high involvement purchases. On the other hand, this particular picture or these different models, they don't apply to low involvement purchases like purchasing a toffee or a maybe a chocolate or maybe a cold drink. So these are low involvement purchases. What is the response sequence in case of a high involvement purchase? Now I have defined high involvement purchases. See, what is important for you is I'm going to show you 3 pictures, but what is important for you to note down this particular picture and this one. High involvement purchases, when you are purchasing a car, you first learn, then you feel, and then you do. That is the cognitive component preceded. The cognitive component would be succeeded by the affective component, the feeling part, and then by the action component, the doing part. Is this okay? On the other hand, low involvement product, like for example a toffee, what would you do? You would go to a shop at the spur of the moment. At that very instance, you might decide to buy a toffee, and then you buy that toffee. You do what? So you have basically done what? First of all, you have actually gone for the action in the first instance, rather than learning and feeling about it first. You go for the action straight away, you buy it, and then based on what experience you have had consuming that toffee, you start developing a feeling, and then you start learning something about the toffee. Is this okay? So this is basically for a car or a bike, or maybe when you are buying a house, or maybe when you are deciding which particular college to join for your MBA. While the low involvement purchases are the situations wherein you are buying a toffee or a cold drink or maybe something which does not entail a lot of risk, and that is why you are not very much involved in the process. So the response hierarchy models that we have discussed, they actually are meant for these kind of situations, high involvement purchase situations. Fine. Now let's move on to the main part of this session, that is designing the message. So designing the message, how you are going to design your communication message. Again, let me tell you that though the communication platforms available to us, they are 5 in number, the elements in the promotion mix, they are 5 in number, but since it's not possible for us to get the examples for all of them, I am predominantly making use of advertising to put forth my points. So most of the examples that I will be using in this session and the forthcoming sessions also, they would be from advertising. So I may not be able to deal too much with direct marketing, or I may not be talking about examples from personal selling. The reason is that advertising examples are easily available, and you, since you have been exposed to them, you can easily understand the concept by discussing that particular example. So I'd be mostly using the advertising examples, though you should keep in mind, you should bear in mind that all these concepts are equally available, equally acceptable, equally applicable to the other elements in the promotion mix also, right? Now, so how do you design the message? 4 things that you need to basically decide while designing the messages: the content as to what is to be said, structure, how would you be saying this logically in a logical fashion, the format, how would you say this symbolically, and the source, who will say it, right? So we'll be discussing, don't worry about what they mean, because we'll be discussing them all in detail now, one by one. Now, what do we mean by the content? First is the theme. For example, let me give you an idea. What is the storyline? What is the theme of an ad? For example, if you talk about the Pidilite Industries products, Fevicol, Fevikwik, what is the theme there? They are showing a character who is looking for a quick fix for some kind of maybe problem that he is facing. For example, he wants to paste one item over the other, for example. Now, and he is looking for a solution. And the theme is that when you apply Fevikwik, you get an instant solution for these kind of problems of yours. Again, if you talk about the various deodorant ads, perfume ads, what is the theme? The theme is that if you want to be socially acceptable, you want to be, accepted by your friends, you should not smell bad. And that is why you should wear this particular brand of perfume or this particular brand of deodorant, right? So this is the theme. On the other hand, Um, there are some of the deodorant ads wherein the themes are slightly different. Therein they talk about how this particular brand is being used by so many other people, so you should also go and buy this particular brand, because so many other people who are using this brand, they most likely they have made a right decision, so you should also make the same decision and wear this brand. Do you remember kya chal raha hai? Fog chal raha hai. What do we mean? What is the basic theme? The theme is that everybody else is also using fog, so you should also go and buy fog, right? So what is the basic theme that you are going to use in your communication campaigns? Then what is your unique selling proposition? What is that one unique thing in you which would convince the buyer to buy you, to buy your brand? What is it that differentiates your brand from the other brands in the market, from the other products in the market, right? For example, Vico turmeric, nahi cosmetic, Vico turmeric Ayurvedic cream. Now, so Vico turmeric, the unique selling proposition is that it is not a normal cosmetic brand. It does not have various chemicals as ingredients. It is a turmeric powder. Turmeric is healthy, so basically it has those ingredients which are probably herbal in nature, maybe which are good for your skin or good for your health. So that is unique selling proposition. 24-hour germ protection. Have you heard this line in some of the ads? So what do we mean? Basically, this is the unique selling proposition. 24-hour germ protection. So once you use that particular brand of soap, you would be protected from germs for 24 hours, or maybe use that particular brand of paste, then you again get a protection for one full day. That is the unique selling proposition, right? Have you heard of Savlon? The unique selling proposition is, though it is as effective as any other antiseptic liquid, but it does not cause a burning sensation. Jalta nahi hai, right? So that is the unique selling proposition of Savlon, right? Again, the Big Bazaar. You have been to Big Bazaar in Haldwani. इससे सस्ता और अच्छा और कहाँ? So what is the unique selling proposition? That we would give you value for money. We are the cheapest in terms of the prices, but that does not mean that we compromise on quality. So we are saying सस्ता और अच्छा और कहाँ? What is the unique selling proposition used by Maruti? They talk about their extensive dealer network. Wherever you go, you will always find a Maruti service station. Have you seen those ads? A car driver driving in Ladakh and coming across a boy and then asking that boy कि चाय मिलेगी? The boy says no. Restaurant मिलेगा? Says no. But then he asks कि Maruti service station होगा, and then he points to a particular direction, says yes, वहाँ पे है. So what are they trying to tell? They are basically talking about this unique selling proposition of theirs, that their dealership network is very, very large, so you don't need to worry about facing problems while driving in some other parts of the country. So this is what unique selling proposition is all about, and that is something that you don't decide here. Basically, this is something that you'll include in the content. Unique selling proposition is decided at the positioning stage earlier on, where you decide which particular position to acquire, which particular image to have in the mind of the customer, and from there comes the unique selling proposition, which you will include here in your content, basically, right? You will be talking about your unique selling proposition. And then let's talk about the rational, emotional and moral appeals. We make use of appeals in our communication messages. Let's understand what do we mean by the rational appeal. Rational appeal which appeals to the rationality, which appeals to the thinking aspects of an individual, of a customer. It basically talks about the product attributes, right? So what kind of product attributes it focuses on? It could focus on quality, it could focus on economy, it could focus on value, it could focus on the performance of the particular product. Car ads you might have seen. Maruti Suzuki, one of the ads showed how much does it give. What basically they are trying to say, what is the fuel economy, and then he says 22 kilometers per liter. So they are basically talking about the fuel economy, or they're basically talking about the performance, right? So these are rational appeals which talk about the product benefits, and they are more suitable to what kind of situations wherein you are buying to industrial buyers, basically B2B situation, business to business. Why? Because industrial buyers are going to appraise your product based on the attributes only and nothing else. So that is why these kind of appeals are used with B2B, business to business situations, wherein you are trying to sell to industrial buyers. And they are also used in high involvement purchases. High involvement purchases we have already discussed, for example car, for example bike, for example joining a particular college for your MBA. Why? Because therein you don't take a decision just on the basis of your feelings that you are having towards a particular brand. You don't buy a car or a mobile phone just because you feel good about it. You buy it because you have thought about it, right? So these are all high involvement purchases, the car or the bike, or maybe deciding which particular MBA to join. So therein the rational appeal would work. Have you come across these ads wherein they are talking about the various private management institutes talk about the placements and stuff like that, or then maybe their infrastructure and placement and the faculty like that. So they are all talking about their attributes. Why? Because this is a high involvement situation for the customer. So rational appeal would suit these kind of high involvement purchases. On the other hand, we have got emotional appeals. Now emotional appeals basically making use of emotions, feelings to sell the product. Have you ever seen the car launches? When the cars are launched in a big bash ceremony, what happens is you see the models around the cars. What are they basically trying to do? They are making use of emotional appeal at that point of time, right? Just by looking at beautiful models, you might start having good feeling about the models naturally, and then the feelings would also get transferred to the car. So that is what they're trying to achieve there. So emotional appeal is making use of emotions to sell your product, right? And the emotions could be both positive and negative. For example, humor. You talk about the Fevicol and Feviquick ads. Then we've got love. You got the Cadbury's ad wherein they depict love, right? And just to try their product, just to sell their product. Or for example, these ads by Johnson and Johnson, wherein they try to sell their various products to the mothers, so the baby soap and the baby oil to mothers. So therein they make use of love. Pride, Desh Ka Namak, Tata Salt. Or for example, an automobile manufacturer which talked about how the the iron which has been used has been taken from a warship which has now been decommissioned, INS Vikrant. So they were talking about that. So that is pride basically. Again, joy of sharing. For example, Jo Tera Hai Wo Mera Hai, Airtel. So they were talking about these appeals. Therein Airtel did not talk about the various attributes it has. Airtel never talked about therein in that particular campaign. It never talked about the connectivity and the proactive approach as far as dealing with customer complaints is concerned. So had they been talking about these kind of aspects, that would have been a rational appeal, but they were talking about the joy of sharing with your friends. So they were basically using an emotional appeal there, which means that the same brand, same product, same service can make use of different appeals at different point of time. Negative emotions can be used. Guilt. You see that particular ad, policybazaar.com, wherein Akshay Kumar is depicted as is playing Yamdut, Yamraj, and he talks about that person who did not purchase an insurance policy, and because of this particular fact, his family is suffering because he has already died. So the person dies without purchasing an insurance policy and the family has to suffer. So that guilt he's depicting. Again, shame of not using, let's say, a deodorant or not using the right kind of toothpaste or not using the right kind of bathing soap, right? And fear. For example, you might have seen these ads. The ads which are generally shown on national television, which educate the customer about the ill effects of consuming tobacco or smoking. So they are basically making use of fear. However, you need to understand one thing: whenever you are using humor, ensure that it should not distract the customer. For example, if you remember the Fevicol ad line, the Fevicol ad storyline, but you forget the Fevicol brand, then this kind of campaign is of no use because the customer does not remember your brand. So you have to ensure that the humor that you are depicting in your communication, it should not distract the customer from your brand. The customer should still be able to retain the memory of your brand that you are depicting through that communication message. Again, when you are making use of shame, also suggest solution. That is why these various deodorant advertisements that you might have seen, or maybe toothpaste advertisements that you might have seen, they don't only show this situation wherein a person is ridiculed for not wearing the right kind of deodorant, or maybe not having not smelling good just because he's not having the right kind of deodorant or perfume, and then he's shown this solution, he's shown the product that you should buy this. So you have to show the solution also. Just don't talk about shame, also suggest the solution, how to get rid of this kind of shame that you have to show to your audience. Then whenever you are making use of fear, don't use excessive fear, because what will happen is when you are using excessive fear, it will turn off the audience. They will simply stop paying attention to your message. So you use moderate level of fear. Very low level of fear is not going to work. Very high level would mean that the audience would not at all pay attention. Deliberately they would shift their attention to something else. So you have to use moderate level of fear. Now let's talk about moral appeal. Now moral appeal is basically directed to audience sense of right and wrong. Right? Do you remember that particular ad, Atithi Devo Bhavo, which was trying to promote the idea that in India traditionally we have always welcomed our guests as God. So Atithi Devo Bhavo, that was the basic tagline of that particular ad campaign, and Amir Khan was basically trying to educate people about treating the tourists well, because ultimately that has been our tradition also, and if the tourists are treated well, then there would be chances of more tourists coming in and more tourist revenue getting generated in the Indian economy. So that was the whole idea behind the ad campaign. So that was an advertising campaign which was basically using moral appeal. So it was basically directed at the audience sense of right and wrong. What is correct in the light of our traditions? What is right in the light of our traditions? Should we not respect? Should we not treat our guests, the tourists coming from various countries, foreign countries, well? So that was basically an example of a moral appeal. Generally, these kind of appeals are used to promote social ideas and causes, right? So whenever you are trying to promote some social idea, for example, don't drink and drive, don't smoke, this is a social idea. Go and get your child immunized against polio, this is a social idea. So in such instances we use moral appeal. We'll be taking them in more detail in unit 3, where we'll be specifically talking about advertising, right? Now, just to understand, just to assess how much you have understood, you have to identify the appeal. Now what appeal is this? Is it the rational appeal, moral appeal, or emotional appeal? Now please have a look at the, do you remember? This is the copy part. Have a look. Superior wheat, superior cleaning process, superior. Are they talking about emotions, or are they talking about the product attributes? India's number one atta. Are they talking about the attributes? Yes, they are, and that is why this one is a rational appeal. And now I told you a little while ago, the same product, same brand can make use of different appeals at different points in time, and the same thing has happened here. Now identify this kind of appeal here. Here the mother is being shown along with his children. They are enjoying this process of making duff, and they are enjoying this camaraderie. They are, enjoying this communion, coming together and cooking food, right? So don't you think they are talking about emotions here, right? So don't you think it's an emotional appeal that they have used? The same brand, it is ITC Ashirwad. Again here also ITC Ashirwad, same brand making use of two different appeals at two different points in time. And then have a look at this one. Don't drink and drive. Now this is the main message, and this is basically an ad which has been sponsored by a very famous automobile manufacturer, automobile marketer. Can you identify from this logo? You can easily identify. You have all talked the identifying the logo contest, so you can all identify. But see the message here. What is the copy? Spare parts for humans are not as original as those for cars. So they are trying to tell this in a very sarcastic fashion that if somehow you hit somebody, it's not going to be easy for you to get his leg or his hand or other limbs replaced, because they're not so easily available, right? So this is basically use of a moral appeal, or is it a slightly different kind of an appeal? It is basically making use of moral appeal, right? Now let us talk about the structure decision. So we have covered the content part. Now we are moving on to the structure part, right? I hope you remember the 4 aspects that we had discussed a little while ago. The content, what to say, we have discussed already. Structure, how to say it in a logical fashion, that is what we are going to discuss. And then we'll have the format and the source, right? So now let's talk about the structure decisions. Now a few decisions you have to take while you are presenting your arguments to the audience. First thing is one-sided message or two-sided. Now this is one thing that you have to take a call on, whether you are going to have one-sided messages or whether you are going to have two-sided messages. Let's understand, one-sided messages are only going to talk about one aspect, about the positive aspects of your product. So that is why they are called one-sided messages. What would be the two-sided messages? They are also going to talk about the negative aspects, the not so positive aspects of your product. They are called two-sided messages. So they are also talking about the things which are not good in your product, but yes, they would be focusing more on things which are good in your product, right? So these would be the two-sided messages. Where are you going to use one-sided messages? When the audience has a positive attitude towards your offering. When the audience already has a favorable attitude towards your offering, then you use one-sided messages which only talk about the good things, the good attributes of your product. And what would be the order in which you would be presenting your arguments? The strongest argument, the strongest reason for the customer to buy your product should be put in the first place if the audience attention is likely to waver, if the audience is likely to switch over to something else, if the audience is likely not to pay attention, then you start with your strongest argument first. However, if you feel that it is a captive audience, I'll describe what captive audience is, then you start with your strongest, you don't start with your strongest argument, you end with your strongest argument. And there's a reason why we are saying this. I tell you why. But before that, let me explain what captive. Captive is you have captured them. What do we mean basically by this? Captive means they have no option but to watch your ad. For example, let's say you are in a movie hall, right? Cinema hall. And during the break, your ad is getting telecasted. Now this is a captive audience. Yes, they can roam around, but still they will be getting exposed to your ad. They simply do not have the option of switching the channels, right? Of course, so this is what we mean by captive audience. Or for example, let's say they are sitting, supposing you have bought a mobile handset, and then there's a problem, so you've gone to the service station. So you've bought a Samsung mobile and then you've gone to the service station because it was having some problems. So while you are sitting there, you are a captive audience for the Samsung people. They can show their ad only. You don't have the option to switch over to some other ad. Now that is what we mean by captive audience. And when in this sense the audience is captive, then you end with your strongest argument. The reason is that when you end with your strongest argument, the audience would retain the memory of the strongest argument, and then they would be more likely to buy your product. This is okay. However, if the audience is likely to switch its attention to something else, then you start with your strongest argument just to force them to keep paying attention to what you are saying. So you start with your first argument, which is the strongest argument in such instances, right? So I have described the reason why you're doing all these things. So there's a particular reason why you order in a particular sequence, why you have a particular sequence as far as the strength of arguments is concerned. Now let's talk about the two-sided messages. When the audience has negative attitude, so what do? You start with something which is bad about your product. Now since the audience has a negative attitude, they are listening to something which they already have belief in. They are listening to something which closely corresponds to the attitude that they have. So for example, Department of Business Studies, supposing, has a negative attitude. Supposing the customers have a negative attitude towards our BBA course here. So what do we start with? We start with a negative argument. We say, yes, in BBA, you will have to slog very hard. Right? You have to work very hard. Now what happens? The audience listens to a message which corresponds to its negative attitude. So they are now more open to accepting the other arguments in the message. So you start with a negative argument. You start talking about something which is bad in your product, and then you move over to the good aspects, the positive attributes of your product. Right? Fine. And since now the audience is listening to a message initially which corresponded closely to their held attitudes, they would be also listening to the full message. They would also be paying attention to the complete message. And then once you have started with the negative attitude and you have got the attention of the audience, then you move over to the positive aspects, right? And the order would be, when you start by accepting your weakness, some negative aspect, in a very brief fashion. Don't do it in a detailed fashion, because that would be a negative publicity for you. So you do it in a very brief fashion. Then you switch to strength, and then you conclude with the strongest argument, the strongest reason for the customers to buy your product. Right? Now let's have an example here. Now this is Avis. This is not a company from India, but basically I'll tell you the background. There were two companies. One was very, very prominent, and they were car rental companies, just like we have our Ola or maybe Uber. So they were car rental firms, right? So rent a car. So if you want to rent a car, you could have gone to these two firms. So the first firm was the market leader. Now this company Avis was not the market leader. And what was the punchline that they used? Have a look at this. When you are only number two, you try harder or else. What do we mean by this? They're trying to tell the audience that since we are number two, and naturally we would want to be number one, we are going to work harder to please you, to satisfy your requirements than the number one, the market leader. Because market leader, they would be complacent, they are number one, they probably would not work hard enough to satisfy your requirements, to please you. But we are going to work hard enough, because we have to be number one, we aspire to become number one. So please come to us, because we are going to work harder for you. We are going to do whatever possible to please you, to satisfy your requirements. So do come to us. So that is the message behind this particular ad campaign, right? Don't you think this is a two-sided message? They basically started with an argument, with something which is not so positive in them. They are number two. But then they are moving over to a very strong argument that since we are number two, we are going to work very, very hard to please you, right? Fine. Now, then there can be use of framing. Have a look at what we mean by framing. Now this is framing. You can put a positive spin also, you can put a negative spin also on to your communication message, right? Now have a look. Benefit of use. What is the benefit of using a particular brand? Now this is the positive spin. And what would you lose if you don't use a brand? This is the negative spin. Now you've got two ads here, right? I'm predominantly talking about ads. I've already talked about this in detail. I've already described the reason for this. However, all these things are equally applicable as far as other elements in the communication mix are concerned, be it personal selling, be it sales promotion, be it direct marketing, be it public relations. Now have a look at these two ads. Now here, somebody please marry me. So if you don't lose weight, and for that if you don't go to this particular firm which has come up with this ad, and you don't lose weight, nobody is going to marry you. Now this is a very stereotypical look, and probably this kind of advertising is not ethical also, but then my point is slightly different. I'm trying to tell you what negative spin is all about. You are talking about losses arising out of non-use. What about the positive spin? You are talking about the positive aspects of using. So when you are using this particular brand of deodorants, then naturally you will get the girl you want. Again, maybe not a very ethical kind of messaging, but still what I'm trying to tell you is the positive spin. So this is what we mean by positive and negative spin and framing, right? So what spin you are giving to your communication message. And then, should you draw conclusion or should you not draw conclusion for your audience? Should you draw conclusion for your audience? What do we mean by this? Should you, towards the end of your communication campaign, communication message, tell the audience that please buy my product because these are the problems that you would face if you buy some other company's products, and these are the attributes which I have which no other competitor is having. So please buy my product. Now this part, please buy my product, is the conclusion. So do you need to conclude for the audience, or do you need to just leave it to the audience to arrive at their own conclusion? For that again, there are clear-cut decision criteria. So if the audience is less educated, they're not capable of making a decision on their own. Do conclude for themselves. Do conclude for them. And if this is a very complicated issue, do conclude for them. Do tell them that in the end, yes, please buy my product because that is going to satisfy your requirements. Do conclude for them. If they are less educated and if the issue at hand is very, very complicated, for example, in case of a insurance policy, very, very complicated, right? So such financial instruments, for example, a mutual fund, very, very complicated. So you tell them towards the end that please buy this brand of mutual funds or this brand of insurance policies. On the other hand, don't do this at all. Let the audience decide when the audience is highly educated, because then what they will think is they will perceive it to be a disregard for their qualification, for their education background. So don't do this when the audience is educated and when the issue is very, very simple, because they would perceive that the advertiser is trying to boss over them, is the advertiser considers them to be, not so intelligent, not so savvy customers, and they would take it as maybe a humiliation, right? So in such cases, don't at all draw conclusion for the customer. When that particular issue that you are discussing is having personal significance for audience, then again, don't draw conclusions, and when the sender seems untrustworthy, never draw conclusions. So you don't need to draw conclusions in these cases. Let the audience decide on its own. Let the target audience decide on its own. So don't do it when the audience is very educated or the issue at hand is very, very simple, like buying which brand of toffee to consume, deciding which brand of coffee or which brand of coffee to purchase. Again, when the issue is very, very significant for the audience, when the sender seems untrustworthy, when the advertiser, the marketer, is not considered to be a trustworthy brand just because it might be new in the market. In such situations, don't draw the conclusion. Let the audience draw the conclusion on their own that your product is better, so that they should buy your product. So this kind of conclusion they should arrive on their own. One more advantage of having this kind of message structure, when you let the audience decide on its own. In fact, this is known as stimulus ambiguity. So you are being ambiguous. You are not letting the customer know as to which particular brand he should buy. You are only talking about the good aspects of your brand. You are not specifically saying that go and buy my product. So this is called stimulus ambiguity. Ambiguity means something which is not clear. Stimulus is not very clear. That is why we are saying stimulus ambiguity, right? Now it will lead to broader market definition and purchase. What do we mean by this? For example, Maruti when came up with SX4 brand, they never said whether it is meant for boys or it is meant for girls. Or when they came up with the Zen Estilo brand, they never said whether it is meant for males or it is meant for female customers. Though SX4 was predominantly a male brand, which was basically meant for male customers, those who are working in maybe corporates, while the Estilo was predominantly a female brand for women, and the cars were in colors like purple, pink and yellow. So these were predominantly female colors. They never, however, said this in their communication campaign, which meant that Estilo, which was basically meant as a female product for a female customer, that they were also purchased by male customers. On the other hand, Essex phones were also purchased by female customers. So the market definition became broader. So they were now not only concentrating only on female or male customers, it became broader. Likewise, for example, when Fair and Lovely says it is only meant for women, then it is basically narrowing its market definition basically. But when you come up with a cream, for example, Vico turmeric, you're not saying whether it is meant for women or is it meant for men, and that is why you see both men and women using it, right? So when we are not drawing any conclusion for the customers, for the target audience, then it would lead to a broader market definition and purchase also. Now let's talk about the format. What would be the format? The advertisements, it could be in the format of advertisements. Then we've got the print ad or the radio ad, the ones telecasted on television, and nowadays something which is gaining prominence, internet advertisements. It could be packaging also. Packaging in itself communicates a lot to the target audience. The color, have a look at this particular packaging, the color. Have you ever seen some medication in black color? The packaging in black color, you would probably never have seen that, right? So the color also communicates a lot of things. Then the texture, how does the package feel? The scent, how does it smell? The size of the packet, the shape, and the mascot, right? The mascot which they have used is this Amul girl, right? So this is the mascot for Amul. So packaging is also a way in which you can do this. Another is sales promotion. For example, have a look at this merchandise. This is a merchandise, Shaktiman merchandise. Now, I hope you now understand what merchandise is. For example, when Krish 3 was released, starring Hrithik Roshan, such merchandise were released in the market, t-shirts and caps, displaying Krish 3. So this is also used many a times. This is part of sales promotion. We'll be discussing all these elements in little detail once we conclude our discussion on the process of designing a communication campaign here, right? Then we have got contests and free discounted quantity that you give. Now, supposing, now that this example has come up, supposing you go for frequent, sales promotion campaigns like this, when you provide your product at discounted price to your customers, what image are you trying to project? What is your positioning? You are certainly not saying that this is a premium product, because premium products are not available on discounts. Have you ever seen a Mercedes available on a discount? No. Or maybe a Titan available on discount. So you're not trying to communicate this message to the customer. You're not trying to showcase yourself as a premium customer. What your premium brand? You are trying to showcase yourself as an economical brand, which is probably giving you value for money, or maybe the lowest price brand in the market, right? Then direct marketing. In direct marketing, the direct marketing can take place through various means. We'll be discussing them. For example, email could be one, telemarketing could be one, when you are calling up straight away the customer. Direct marketing is when you simply don't have any other intermediary between you and the end customer. So you directly interact with the end customer. This is what direct marketing is, and this could be done through emails also. So what is the subject line? What is the layout of your mail? It could be done through telemarketing also, when you are calling up the prospective customer and you are describing your product. So there the script, what exactly is being said on telephone, that is the script. So these elements are part of the message format, right? Then as far as public relation exercises are concerned, public relation exercises, I hope you remember from your discussion in marketing management. Public relation means, for example, the CEO's speech, the various news items regarding the going-ons in the company's newsletters, the financial statements of the company. So these are all part of public relation exercises. And for example, newsletter design within public relation could be one format that you can use for messaging. Then you can organize various events. For example, what kind of event is there and what is the occasion? What is the venue? What are the atmospherics? What do we mean by the atmospherics? Have a look here. Big Bazaar, you see the atmospherics. When you go inside, you go to any store in Big Bazaar store, maybe in Delhi, in Gurgaon, in Nainital, Haldwani, wherever, you would find the same layout, same entrance, same way in which the clothes are stacked, same kind of danglers hanging from above, same kind of, layout, same kind of color scheme also. This is what we mean by atmospherics, right? So what all events you are organizing, for example, on what occasions? For example, so many hospitals, private hospitals nowadays, they organize free health checkups, and that is the case with even Pithoragarh here. So many private hospitals in Haldwani, based in Haldwani, they organize free health checkups for the customers here, for the people here. So that is the occasion. And where do they organize it, right? If they are organizing it in a slum area, what kind of image would it communicate? It would communicate that they are providing their services at a very low cost. So they are the lowest cost competitor in the market. On the other hand, if they are organizing their health checkup camp in a sophisticated facility with all the machines and equipments around, this would project a different kind of image, project a premium kind of image for their hospital, right? Fine. So these message formats you can use endorsement. Endorsement is when you are making use of a celebrity, well-known individual who will endorse, who will speak favorably about your product. So that is what endorsement is. For example, Juhi Chawla endorsing Kurkure, right? PepsiCo product Kurkure, so it is being endorsed by Juhi Chawla, and there are so many such other examples. So here celebrity image is important, because why are you could have also used Rahul Dravid, for example, here, or maybe Nawazuddin Siddiqui. The reason is Kurkure is used when you are certainly in a such serious situation. You are not going to make use of Kurkure. You are going to use Kurkure in a light-hearted situation, in a light situation wherein you are with your friends or maybe family members and you are enjoying. Maybe you are going on a picnic, and the same kind of image this celebrity also has. Juhi Chawla is known as a peppy kind of a girl, girl next door kind of an image. So they are using celebrity image to communicate something about their product, about Kurkure brand of product, right? Kurkure brand of snacks. So these are the various formats that are available to you. We'll have to discuss the advertising in detail, so that we'll discuss. However, you have discussed already packaging and sales promotion and direct marketing, public relations and events. You have already talked about them. Events and endorsement, basically they are part of the public relations only, right? So we'll again be taking them up in detail, a little detail in this very unit, and advertising will be taken up in greater depth in unit 3, right? Now let's talk about the source. Now, who is actually the source of the message? Who is actually saying something about your product or about your service? And very, very important to have an attractive source. Have a look at these ads. For example, Slice, Aam Sutra ad, and then we've got Katrina Kaif. So if the source is attractive, it will lead to better attention and recall. Naturally, the audience would pay attention to your communication campaign, to your communication message, and since they have paid attention, they would be able to retain the memory of your message for a longer period of time. Then you can also make use of humor. For example, see, Pet Safa, Ro Dafa, Raju Srivastava, famous comedian, stand-up comedian, and then naturalness. So whoever is being used as the source, you have to ensure that the source has to be attractive. You can make use of naturalness, you can make use of humor also to make this happen. Then you have to also ensure source credibility. Credibility means you can trust the source. How is it possible for you to trust the source? In what all situations would it be possible? Would it be feasible for you to trust the source? When you believe that the source is an expert, and when you believe that the source is trustworthy, right? Expert means he should have specialized knowledge to back claims. Now, why is Virat Kohli being shown here? Why is Volini using Virat Kohli as an endorser? The reason is very simple. Virat Kohli, a sports person, so might be suffering various cramps on a regular basis, and he might be using, so naturally he would be considered an expert, right? Again, have a look at this particular picture. Now this guy may not necessarily be a doctor, but he's being depicted as a doctor just because doctors would be more, they would have greater knowledge about what is good for your teeth and what is bad for your teeth. And if they are recommending a particular product, naturally they would be recommending based on their experience and based on their expertise. So that is the reason why we are using this kind of an individual here, right? And the source should also be trustworthy, honest, should be objective. It should not be impacted, it should not be affected by his emotions in recommending a particular product, in recommending a particular brand. So he should be honest and objective, and he should not be having any interest in selling the product. This is fine. Then you have to use celebrities. Use them if they personify the product attributes. Now what do we mean by this? Personifying the product attributes. What do we mean by this? Have a look at what basically Katrina Kaif is being shown here. Now Katrina Kaif is an attractive celebrity, and she is basically personifying the product here which has been shown here, this non-carbonated drink. Now, right now, again, if you talk about, for example, life insurance, you might have seen Rahul Dravid. So Rahul Dravid is known as Mr. Stable. He's Mr. Dependable. So you can depend on Rahul Dravid because he will not lose his wicket, and you might have seen Rahul Dravid in various formats. So he was known for being dependable. He would not lose his wicket, and he would remain there for the team. And the same image you are trying to communicate for your life insurance policy also. That is why you are using Rahul Dravid there. Or for example, if you talk about Revital, you are using a Salman Khan or a Yuvraj Singh, because they are personifying. They also have the same attributes which the product has. So you have to use celebrities. There should be a close match between what kind of personality they are and what kind of personality do you want for your brand, what kind of image you want for your brand. So naturally you are not going to use Suresh Raina or Yuvraj Singh for a life insurance policy, right? So that's all in this session. It has been a relatively longer session. In the next session we'll be discussing the other 5 steps in the process of designing the communication message. Thank you very much.